Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pro Tools Answers, where we discuss, demonstrate and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put to us in the official Avid Pro Tools support forum on Facebook. My name is Dave Phillips, audio engineer and lecturer for Point Blank music schools in the UK, and the two geniuses joining me as ever are Anders at Tonkraft Work in Austria and a lecturer for Siegen University in Germany.
Hi.
And of course, we have Avid's master instructor and Avid's audio curriculum manager based over in Tokyo, Mr. Andy Hagerman.
Good evening.
Hello. That's a little odd. It's 12:22 for me right here. Sun is shining, but it's evening.
It's after dinner over here.
Mind blowing.
Nice.
Now what we do is we wade in on the forum post to throw in our 2 cents, but there's generally so much noise in the group and nuance in the circumstances that the right answers aren't always highlighted, and often there isn't enough information to clearly present the answer anyway. Now, a part of our job as lecturers and trainers is to take complex issues and boil them down with clear explanations and demonstrations in context, and that's what we aim to do here. And one day I'm going to be able to say the word explanation properly. There we go. I might just take that little snippet and then just drop it in.
Sample it.
Yeah.
Dave,
drop it in every week.
by the way, what episode is this?
You're going to have to tell me, Anders, because I've lost count.
Well, are we doing like a Pro Tools thingy where we, after Pro Tools 12, they skipped the next coming version for obvious reasons? And I think last week was episode 12 for us. So this is episode 2021.5.
There you go.
That's the episode number. Right, that's exactly what it's going to be. Okay. Today's subject is inspired by Dana, and it's a 3-part question that we're going to cover over 3 episodes, Andy?
I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to make a little mini-series out of Dana's question. And it's all about taking audio into Pro Tools and then deriving tempo from that, and also the other way around as well. We're going to look at bringing audio into the session and then conforming that to tempo as well, and there are a number of ways to do it. Now the first question is, can I lock a piece of audio that I've imported into a session to the grid and tempo? Is there a name for this procedure? And there is. Is there a name for it specifically? There's a protocol that we're going to discuss through the course of this episode. Question 2, though, is I'm trying to take an imported audio file and determine the tempo and have it align with the grid. I have tried identify beat. I get what I think is a fairly accurate tempo and I set it, but if I play a click track with it, it's off and the transients don't align with the grid. And speaking of, how does the file get aligned with the grid? Does Pro Tools do it automatically when you enter the tempo? And what if the waveform has space before the audio begins? So much to unpack in that question.
Yep.
So we're going to start. We do have the third question, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. Now, there's a couple of things that I think is going on that he's trying and he's doing, but it's not kind of working in the overall goal of what he's trying to achieve. I think he's trying to use tap tempo to find the natural tempo of the song, and then changing the tempo in Pro Tools, and then manually aligning part of the clip or part of the audio to the grid and expecting everything to follow. He mentions identify beat, but I'm not entirely sure how he's using it. I think he may be using it a couple of times, but I think the thing with identify beat, as we're going to discover now, is that we have to do it over the entire length of the song. Would that be right to say?
Yeah, and multiple times over the entire length of the song.
Just like I'm going to show now. So I have a session here that I actually need to make into a click track. This is a recording of an entire concert. Well, half of an entire concert. This is set 1. And I need to make click tracks out of it, and I need to make charts out of it. And the identify beat procedure is actually going to be helping me, because I need to essentially quantize my session, the bars and beats grid of my session, to the audio. And this is typically, it's kind of backwards the way that a majority of people think about it, because you think about setting the tempo in Pro Tools, importing audio to it, and then quantizing the audio to what the tempo is. But we're literally going to be doing it the other way here. And the way that I refer to it is quantizing the session to the audio so that the bars and beats match up with the actual performance length. And the way
you don't change the performance. This is the key point. We're not quantizing the audio. We're quantizing the timeline to the audio.
Yeah, so nothing audibly is going to change, but the visual feedback is going to line up with ideally what's going on in the performance.
But why, Dave? Why would you do that?
Well, as I said, I'm doing it for making click tracks. So if I can make the MIDI grid line up with my musical performance, the click track will follow that.
Okay.
And that's the ultimate goal. Well, that's one of the ultimate goals. The second goal is charting. So I can use the MIDI grid to inform the chart length, where things appear in specific bars and things like that. So it's got there's a couple of uses for this.
Yeah, and of course an added benefit is the way that you can navigate a session when it's on the grid. If you're thinking about going to bar 32 and you jump to bar 32, you're actually landing on the first beat of bar 32. So there are a lot of advantages of doing this.
I'll throw another one in there. Delays.
Yeah,
having delays follow your tempo and all that stuff. So why do we even bother with all these different things you can do? Because the workflow that Dave's going to show you and that we'll discuss is time consuming. Setting up these bar beat markers, which is what Dave's going to show you, it's going to take some time. But if you do this work ahead of time, the payoff down the road is immense.
Yeah, indeed. It's very similar to colorizing your tracks and putting your tracks in the right orders and doing all of your routing before you crack on with your session, isn't it? It's just session setup.
Exactly right.
Okay. So first, what I have here, as I said, is an entire performance of a set. So I've just split off one of my tracks, and I'll split all of these into separate files later on. But to start off with, I'm just going to activate the all group and then drag this to the beginning of the track. And going to use tab to transient to just chop off the beginning, because I don't need any of that stuff at the beginning. And actually what I might do here is I'm just going to stick this on the beginning of bar 4. Now what we may end up discussing later is changing bar numbers. But the reason that I'll be sticking this on bar 4 and starting this track on bar 4 is because I like to have 2 bars of click intro at the beginning. This isn't for the chart. This is for the backing track. I'll have a bar's worth of setup, and then I'll have 2 bars worth of click. So from the point of view of my backing track, this is the way that I'll start setting up. And then, as I said, we can change the bar numbers later after the fact to represent different end goals. So I don't know what the tempo of this song is. We can see from these kick beats here, and I'm always working from kick beats when I'm deriving tempo from a performance, because I think that's the most accurate way to do it. I think all drummers tend to, or all musicians rather, when they're playing live, tend to refer to the drummer for their tempos, for better or worse sometimes. But certainly in a recorded performance, the kick drum is ideally what I aim for. Is that the same for you guys?
Usually, yeah. I mean,
if you have a drummer, that is.
If you have a drummer, I mean, the nice thing about kick, especially if you're recording a kick track, is it tends to be very visually clear. I also, if I want to get granular, and we'll talk about this later, is I'll do a kick and snare. So I'll do on the beat if it's something that's really groove oriented.
Okay, so I'm going to use tab to transient just to manually count my bars here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's going to be beat. That's going to be the next bar. So I'm going to press Command I. It's going to bring up this add bar and beat marker dialog, and it allows me to then tell Pro Tools what that particular bar is. So if I type in bar number 5, we can see that the grid has updated itself, and it's placed a number 5 at that particular point in the timeline. 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll do that as number 6. Command I is the controller. I'm now going to just bump over and do 2 bars at a time. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll jump over and we'll name that as bar 8. I hope my maths is correct, because things can fall apart quite quickly if you miscount things. And we can see here visually that suddenly all of my kick drums are lining up really nicely with the grid. Now, as Andy said, this can be a time-consuming thing, but it really is ultimately worth it. And it'll take sort of 5, 6, 7 minutes to go through a 3.5 minute or so song, and then the end goal.
That is an economically sized edit window. Oh, there we go.
And here's the ultimate goal. So we have bar and beat markers representing, every so often throughout the track, and the goal is that I'm not bar and beat markering every individual bar throughout the song, but if the musicians are playing consistently, which I think a majority of people are these days because click tracks is such a thing, when you actually drill down and look at the waveform, you can see when things are lining up with bars. And you can certainly hear it when you're playing back and you're counting. You can see that things are working. So that would be the way to do it, is selecting a specific bar, using tab to transient, or selecting a specific transient rather, pressing Command I, and then, so we'll mark that as number 80, and then the bar grid gets essentially quantized to wherever I've put my edit cursor and where I've asked Pro Tools to identify that specific beat.
So that's really cool. Now, one of the things that is a visual nuance, but is critical, is that in the tempo ruler, what you're seeing are little blue triangles. When you have a blue triangle, what you're looking at are bar and beat markers. Okay, and Dave, because I know you use the shortcut because it's a great shortcut to know, but there is a menu item for this as well. So what Dave did was Command I, which is identify beat, where you're telling Pro Tools what musical location this is. You will also find that same item in the event menu, where you'll find other MIDI stuff. So identify beat is also there. So it's a great shortcut to know. Now here's the thing, is what you see in the timeline right now, when you see blue markers, is those markers are identifying a bar and beat location. They are not identifying a tempo. The tempo is the result, okay? Mm-hmm. So Dave, do me a quick favor. Yep. Put yourself in slip mode.
Yep.
You know where I'm going with this. Now drag the middle beat marker, that one right there, go up.
Hold on a sec. Let me just...
Yep. Now, see what happens here to tempo, because the bar beat marker is not establishing a tempo change. It's establishing a musical location, and tempo will change as a result. So those are not your normal tempo markers. Those are musical locations. It's just important to understand what you're looking at. If you want to look at tempo events, those are going to be green markers. So if you're looking at a tempo ruler that's got a bunch of little green triangles, those are tempo changes that don't have any relevance to bars and beats. But once you start to do this workflow, then all of your markers there will turn blue, as you're seeing in Dave's screen.
Yeah. Now, there's something that I want to deal with as well, just on the back of that, is Dana asked about locking things to do things get locked to the timeline. And if you notice, when I was just moving those this bar and beat marker here, we noticed that although the MIDI stuff was updating, but my actual audio file wasn't, even though I'd moved everything over to Tix mode, but I'd forgotten to put the track into elastic audio mode. Now, by sticking the track in elastic audio mode, and therefore turning the clip into an elastic audio and enabled clip, and then selecting Tix mode, that's the process for then locking all of these event markers. If I just move over to analysis view, I'm locking each of these event markers to the bars and beats grid. So when we're actually moving things around, that's where the locking occurs. So in answer to Dana's first question, do things get locked to the grid? They don't automatically. The only thing that gets locked to the grid, I think, from the word go is the clip boundaries, right? Because they're on an audio track, they're instantly locked to the samples grid.
To the samples grid.
Unless you change that in preferences. So that's the only thing that gets locked. But the moment that you put things into TIX mode and you switch on Elastic Audio, that's where everything gets locked then to the bars and beats grid. So whatever we do to the bars and beats grid, anything that's Elastic Audio enabled and in TIX mode
sure that
will then
he's
update
actually is
to that,
what he
to that
wants to happen, because when you're doing that, you're effectively time stretching and compressing on the other end, and I don't think that's what he's trying to do, but you explained it extremely well. That's what happens. Just to add a couple of things here, like you said, Andy, those are now bar and beat markers with the blue triangles, and there are no tempo change events visible here, and that's because you cannot have both of those at the same time. They are all either tempo events or they are all bar and beat markers. Every one of them are either green or blue, and that's because they are fundamentally not compatible with each other. We can convert them to another, but they cannot both exist at the same tempo ruler at the same time. The conversion process, if you want to know, is if you command clicking the little plus icon in the tempo ruler, you can select what kind of markers you will have. And if you change this now to tempo events, all of them will be recalculated to tempo events, which are green. But then as soon as you add another bar and beat marker, they will all be converted back again to the blue bar and beat markers.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that's a great point. And when you drag, so if you change it back to tempo events, then if you move that middle one, then you'll see that tempos will change, but it doesn't reestablish that musical location in time. That's the difference.
No.
Now, you can have bar beat markers once every bar. You can have bar beat markers once every 8 bars. There's no real rule to this. But if the longer you set your bar beat marker, so if I had a bar beat marker at the beginning of my song and the beginning of the last bar of my song, there would be one static tempo for that whole song. Okay, and that might work perfectly for you. But you can also go another way, and let me show you a different route that you can take and why I went this route. So here you're going to see a session, and I'll zoom out so that you can see the whole 9 yards. So it's a pretty long, it's a pop song, and you'll see over here where there's like these clusters of a bunch of little blue markers, and these are all bar beat markers like we showed before. And I'll show you how the resolution that I am getting here. So you can see in here that the tempo is about the same, but I've recorded, I think, down to the 16th note. Let me just check that grid. Yeah, so every 16th note, I basically bar and beat marked the drum track because I wanted to have an arpeggiator. There's an arpeggiator that goes on in this, and I wanted to have it not only follow the tempo, but to follow the groove of what was going on in these sections. So you can go as crazy as you want to. And what you get is more benefit. So, me doing this work might seem like a tremendous expenditure of time, and it is. But when you get the delays and everything else to groove together, that it pays off immediately, because you can spend forever going blind trying to get things to groove together, or you can just do this one time and everything tends to fall into place. And that's an edit stop. And Anders, you were going to mention something about song start. Because I believe the question is in Dave's. He said, "What if there's some space before the audio?" Is that
so? I have a typical pop song recording here, and the recording starts at bar 3 right now. And maybe you've let some space be here to have a pickup or count off or something like that. And usually I also record not starting at the very first bar, because anything recorded prior to the first bar, even if it's just a little or whatever on the guitar, it doesn't get recorded. And the song start position marker is this little red guy here. And there are two ways to do this effectively. You can take this and just pull it on your ruler to the position where the song starts. And when I release it, you can see this song position start marker here to this place. But it also moved my marker. So anything that's tick based will move as I drag this marker. So what I'll do is just return it again and show you the other way to do this, and that's going into event, time operations, and move song start. And here I can choose where I want to move this to. So I'll set that to bars and beats and move the start to bar 3. And renumber song start to bar 1, of course. And here I can choose to move everything, including all of my sample-based markers and tracks. But in this case, I will just move the song start. That's the only thing that I want to move. In your case, it might be different, but in this case, I will just move the song start. Hit apply, and there you can see that I have a song start marker and the right location. So one effect of this is, of course, every time you press the return key to go back to the start of your song, it jumps back to this position. And there's a great shortcut to actually jump back to the song position start marker, and that's by holding the control key and pressing return. You jump back to the song start position marker instead.
Nice, because that's the difference between return to 0 and returning to what essentially is bar 1, isn't it? When you shift things around, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there's another that one, by the way, is a great workflow, and it's the way I normally do it. There's another alternative way that you can do it, and it just gives you a different outcome. And I happen to do that in this particular case. I don't even remember why I did it, but you can see here my song start is at the beginning, but it starts with bar 0. Okay, so there's basically a bar's worth of at the beginning, and over here is where my song actually really does start. Now, a lot of folks would basically have the bar 1 and the song would start at bar 2, but that can cause a nightmare of trying to figure out what bar you're actually really on. So one of the things you can do is what Anders did. The other way you can do it, and it gives you just a different outcome, is you can renumber your bars. So basically, if you go up to event and renumber your bars, so move song start is up here in your time operations, move song start. Renumber bars doesn't move your song start. It just renumbers your bars, and it doesn't do anything else to anything else. So, all of your tick-based markers. So if I wanted to change bar 1 becomes bar 2 for whatever example. Let's go ahead here. Boom. There you go. And now basically I've changed this to bar 1 and this to bar 2. Nothing else has changed. The song start stays exactly where it is. Everything else stays exactly where it is. I can change it back by going up to event, renumber bars, bar 1.
Great stuff, Andy.
Becomes bar 0. Now it goes back to what I had. It's two different ways to do the same thing, and there probably is some world in which this distinction made a difference. I don't think it actually did in my project, and I've done what Anders does a million times. But either way that you do that, it is valuable to have a little bit of breathing room before your audio actually starts, for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which being that MIDI cannot record anything prior to the beginning of the timeline. So there's a lot of reasons why you might do that. So anyways, that's just a different way to do that stuff. Boink.
So in terms of Dana's original question, that covers being able to quantize our beat so that our MIDI grid will follow the tempo of the piece of music that he's brought in. Yep. And then if you wanted that session to then begin right at the beginning of his song, we can move the song start, we can rename the bars after the fact. It doesn't have to be done at the very beginning. But of course, one of the simplest things would be just to slice the beginning of the audio at the transient and drag it to bar 0. That's another alternative.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're spoiled for choice with Pro Tools. So that's the way that you can get your timeline to match the audio that you've got already in your session. That's important, right? For all the reasons that we talked to before. It makes editing easier, it makes delays easier, it makes everything easier, your click track, all that stuff, right? But what happens when you bring in audio that is of a different tempo? How do you get that to align to the timeline that's already in the session, right? What we talked about now is aligning your session timeline to match your audio. How do you align your audio to match your tempo, which is the natural extension of the question that was being asked. In fact, I think he actually did ask that later on in his question. And we're going to talk about that in the next show. So tune in next week. Wow, hold on a second. So tune in next week for the exciting second part of a 3-part course. No,
the exciting conclusion.
The exciting conclusion of, but that's what we're going to talk about next. Is then once we get the timeline that we want, how do we get the audio that we import to match that timeline? And there's a lot of different ways to do it, and there are good ways to do it and not so great ways. And we're going to show you a couple of tips.
Cool. All right, and so hopefully you'll join us for that one. If you guys haven't yet done so, please hit subscribe on the channel. And if you've enjoyed what we were doing, then please hit like on the video as well. If you want to hit the dislike button, that's fine. Just remember that you have to hit it 4 times. Otherwise, it won't work. If you fancy heading over to ProToolsAnswers.com, we've got a whole load of stuff over there as well. If you fancy supporting us on Patreon, we'd appreciate your support there. And otherwise, we'll continue the series next week. So thank you to Anders. And thank you to Andy.
You betcha.
My name's Dave. We'll see you next week. This is
Great
Pro Tools
episode,
Answers.
guys.